Sometimes the loneliest people are the ones who've convinced themselves they don't need anyone at all. For 15 years, that's exactly who Elias Kane was, a mountain man, living in complete isolation in the Colorado Rockies. He chose this life after losing everything that mattered. Then one winter evening, a desperate widow named Sarah appears at his door with her 2 young children. They're cold, hungry, and have nowhere else to turn. Elias tells them what he's told himself for years. I've always been alone, but when you're facing a brutal winter in the wilderness, sometimes survival means letting people in. Can a man who built walls around his heart learn to care again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin stood where it had always stood, tucked into a fold of the mountain like a secret kept between the pines and the sky. Elias Kane built it with his own hands 15 years ago, every log cut and shaped with deliberate care, every joint fitted so precisely that the wind couldn't find its way through even on the coldest nights. It wasn't a large structure, just one main room with a sleeping loft above and a small lean-to workshop attached to the side, but it was solid, permanent, a place that would outlast him if the mountain allowed it. He woke before dawn, as he always did. The darkness inside the cabin was complete and familiar, broken only by the faint orange glow of embers in the stone fireplace he'd built into the north wall. Elias lay still for a moment, listening. The wind moved through the pines outside with a sound like distant water. An owl called once, twice, then fell silent. No other sounds, no voices, no footsteps, just the mountain breathing around him, the way it had breathed for longer than any man could measure. He rose and dressed in the dark, pulling on wool pants worn soft with age, a flannel shirt he'd mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches, and thick socks his wife had knitted 20 years ago. The socks had holes now, but he couldn't bring himself to throw them away. Some things you kept, not because they were useful, but because they were all you had left. The morning routine never changed. Elias stirred the coals and added kindling, then 2 split logs from the stack beside the hearth. He filled the iron kettle from the water bucket and set it on the hook above the fire. While the water heated, he stepped outside into the pre-dawn cold. October in the high country came with a bite that promised winter wasn't far behind. Frost covered everything, the woodpile, the rain barrel, the split-rail fence he'd built around the small clearing. His breath hung in the air like smoke. Elias stood on the porch for a moment, studying the sky. Clear now, but there were clouds building to the northwest, big ones, the kind that carried snow even this early in the season. He walked to the woodshed and loaded his arms with split pine and aspen, enough to last the day and into the evening. The physical work felt good. It always had. There was honesty in labor, in the weight of wood against your arms, in the burn of cold air in your lungs. These were things you could measure and understand, not like feelings, not like the thoughts that sometimes crept in during the quiet hours. Back inside, Elias made coffee in the blue enamel pot that had been his father's. Strong and black, no sugar. He'd run out of sugar 4 months ago and hadn't bothered to make the 3-day ride to the trading post in Blackstone. Sugar was a luxury, coffee was a necessity, and he traded pelts for it twice a year. Everything else he needed, the mountain provided. He sat in the rocking chair he'd built during his first winter alone and drank his coffee slowly, watching the light change outside the window. The chair had been a project born of too many empty hours, too much silence. He'd carved it from pine, fitted the joints with wooden pegs, sanded it smooth with patience that came from having nothing but time. Now it sat by the fireplace, worn smooth from 15 years of use, the arms darkened by the oil from his hands. The cabin held few possessions, but each one had its place and purpose. The rifle, his father's Winchester, hung above the door on wooden pegs. 2 iron skillets sat on a shelf near the fireplace, along with a Dutch oven, 3 tin plates, 2 cups, and a handful of utensils. His hunting knife, its blade honed to an edge sharp enough to shave with, rested in a leather sheath on his belt. A small table stood beneath the window, scarred from years of use. 1 chair, He'd built 2 chairs originally. The second one he'd broken up for firewood during the 3rd winter, when the loneliness got so heavy he couldn't stand to look at it anymore. In the loft above, accessible by a ladder, was his sleeping area. A mattress stuffed with pine needles and covered with wool blankets. A trunk at the foot of the bed that held his few clothes, some personal items he never opened, and memories he tried not to think about. The workshop lean-to held his tools. A workbench of ice, saws and planes and chisels organized on the wall. Traps hung from nails, steel jaw traps for beaver and fox, snares for rabbits, stretching frames for pelts. A grinding wheel for sharpening. This was where he spent most of his time when he wasn't hunting or checking his trap lines. Working with his hands kept the thoughts away. Elias finished his coffee and stood. The day's work called. His trap line ran along the creek 2 miles east, following the water down through a series of beaver ponds. He needed to check it before the weather turned. The clouds were building faster now, darkening the northwest horizon. He gathered his gear with practiced efficiency. The rifle loaded and ready, his knife, a coil of rope, a canvas pack with dried meat, matches wrapped in oilcloth, and an extra blanket. You didn't go into the high country unprepared, not even for a few hours. The mountain didn't care about your plans. The mountain would kill you if you got careless. Before leaving, Elias stood in the doorway and looked back at the cabin. Everything was in order. Fire banked. Water bucket full. The place looked the same as it had yesterday, and the day before that, and all the days stretching back through the years. Orderly, quiet, empty. He pushed the thought away and stepped outside. Pulling the door shut behind him, the walk to the trapline took him through country he knew as well as he knew his own hands. Every tree, every rock, every turn of the trail was familiar. He moved quietly out of long habit, reading the forest as he went. Fresh deer tracks here, a day old. Elk droppings there, still steaming in the cold air. A raven called from somewhere above, its voice harsh and mocking. The first trap was empty. So was the second. At the third, he found a young fox, rust-red and beautiful even in death. Elias reset the trap with quick, efficient movements, then skinned the fox right there, working the hide free with careful cuts. The pelt was prime, thick with winter fur. It would bring a good price come spring. He continued down the line. 2 more foxes, 1 beaver. Not a bad haul. By the time he finished checking the last trap, the clouds had covered half the sky and the wind had shifted, coming now from the north and carrying the smell of snow. Elias looked up at the darkening sky and frowned. The storm was coming faster than he'd expected. He needed to get back. He made good time on the return, moving at a steady pace that ate up the miles. The first snowflakes started falling when he was still a mile from the cabin, fat and wet, melting when they hit the ground. Within minutes, they were falling harder, and the wind was picking up, pushing through the pines with a sound like anger. By the time he reached the clearing, visibility had dropped to maybe 50 feet. The snow was coming down so thick and fast it seemed solid, like a white wall moving through the trees. This wasn't just an early snow. This was a blizzard, the kind that could last for days and bury everything under 3 feet of heavy, wet snow. Elias pushed through to the cabin, already thinking about what he'd need. Enough wood stacked inside to last a week. Food stores were good. He had smoked meat, dried beans, flour, coffee. Water wouldn't be a problem with all this snow. He could ride out the storm easy enough. He'd done it before. He was 10 feet from the porch when he saw them, 3 figures huddled against the cabin wall, trying to shelter from the wind. A woman and 2 small shapes that had to be children. They looked up as he approached, and even through the driving snow, Elias could see the desperation in the woman's face. She stood slowly, placing herself between him and the children, protecting them. Even exhausted and half-frozen, her instinct was to shield them. "Please," she said. Her voice was rough, strained. "We need help." Elias stopped. His hand moved automatically to the rifle, not raising it, just touching it. After 15 years alone, strangers showing up at your door wasn't a good thing. It was usually a dangerous thing, but these weren't outlaws or drifters. This was a woman who looked like she was at the end of her strength, and two children who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. They were shaking with cold, their clothes inadequate for this weather, their faces pale and frightened. "Where did you come from?" Elias asked, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't talk much these days. Sometimes days would go by without him saying a single word out loud. "A wagon," the woman said. "Broken axle about 2 miles back. We tried to fix it, but..." She gestured helplessly at the storm. "We saw your smoke. We walked here, 2 miles in this storm with 2 young children." Elias looked at them more carefully. The girl was maybe 8, dark-haired and solemn-faced, standing close to her mother, with a hand clutched in her mother's skirt. The boy was younger, 5 or 6, and he was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Their lips were turning blue. "My name is Sarah Thompson," the woman continued. "This is Emma and Thomas. We're heading to my sister's homestead near Blackstone. We just need..." Her voice caught. "We just need to get warm. Please, I can pay you." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Every instinct he'd developed over 15 years of solitude told him to send them away. He didn't take in strangers. He didn't let people into his life. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. People left. People died. The only way to avoid that pain was to keep everyone at a distance. But the boy was shaking so hard now, he could barely stand. The girl's eyes were starting to look glassy, and the storm was only getting worse. If he sent them away, they'd die out there. Simple as that. He'd done many things in his life he wasn't proud of, but he'd never murdered children. And that's what it would be, murder, to turn them away in this weather. "Inside," he said gruffly, "before you all freeze to death." The relief that washed over Sarah's face was so intense, it was almost painful to see. "Thank you. Thank you so..." "Save it," Elias cut her off. He moved past them to unlock the door. "Get inside and warm up. We'll talk after." He pushed the door open and stepped aside. Sarah ushered her children in quickly, and Elias followed, closing the door against the wind and snow. The cabin, which had felt perfectly adequate an hour ago, suddenly seemed very small with 4 people in it. The children stood by the door, dripping melted snow onto the floor, looking around with wide eyes. Sarah kept her hands on their shoulders, as if afraid they might disappear if she let go. Elias moved to the fireplace and stirred up the coals, adding kindling and wood until flames caught and began to spread. The children gravitated toward the heat immediately, holding out their hands. "Get out of those wet clothes," Elias said, without looking at them. "There are blankets in the trunk up in the loft. Wrap up in those while your things dry." He busied himself with practical matters while they changed, hanging their wet coats and boots near the fire, filling the kettle with water, and setting it to boil. He could make some weak tea, maybe warm up some of the rabbit stew from yesterday. Get some food in them. When he finally turned around, he found all 3 of them wrapped in his wool blankets, sitting on the floor near the fireplace. The children were huddled against their mother, and Sarah had her arms around both of them. They looked like refugees, which Elias supposed they were. Sarah met his eyes. "I'm sorry to impose on you like this. I know you weren't expecting company." That was an understatement. Elias hadn't had another person in this cabin since the day he'd finished building it. He'd never wanted another person in it. "Storm should blow through in a day or 2, he said. "You can stay until then. After that, you'll need to move on." It came out harsher than he'd intended, but Sarah just nodded. "Of course. We're grateful for whatever shelter you can provide." An uncomfortable silence fell. The children stared at him with wide eyes, and Elias suddenly had no idea what to do with himself. He settled for making tea, measuring out the precious leaves carefully and pouring hot water over them. While it steeped, he warmed up the stew and dished it into tin bowls. "It's not much," he said, handing them each a bowl and a spoon. "But it's hot." The children fell on the food like they hadn't eaten in days. Maybe they hadn't. Sarah ate more slowly, but Elias could see the hunger in the way she scraped every bit from the bowl. He sat in his rocking chair with his own bowl, eating in silence and watching them. The boy, Thomas, kept sneaking glances at him, curious and a little frightened. The girl, Emma, ate with focused determination, as if she knew she needed the strength. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire crackled, and 4 people sat in a silence that wasn't entirely comfortable, but wasn't hostile either. Elias Kane had told himself for 15 years that he preferred being alone, that he didn't need anybody. That solitude was a choice, not a sentence. Sitting there in his cabin with 3 strangers, dripping melted snow on his floor and wrapped in his blankets, he wasn't so sure anymore, and that uncertainty scared him more than any storm ever could. The storm raged through the night and into the next day. Elias woke to find the world outside buried under 2 feet of snow, with more still falling. The wind had died down some, but the snow showed no signs of stopping. He stood at the window, coffee in hand, and calculated. 3 days, maybe 4 before this cleared enough for travel. Maybe longer. Behind him, Sarah and the children still slept. He'd given them the loft, insisting he was fine by the fire. Truth was, he hadn't slept much. Having people in his space felt wrong, like wearing someone else's boots. Every small sound, a child's sigh, Sarah shifting in her sleep, pulled him awake. He'd learned in his years alone that solitude had a sound, a particular quality of silence that was almost alive. Last night that silence had been broken, and he'd felt its absence like a missing tooth, his mind constantly probing the gap where it used to be. Emma was the first to wake. She climbed down the ladder quietly, moving with a careful grace that seemed too old for her years. When she saw him by the window, she froze. "It's all right," Elias said gruffly. "There's porridge on the stove." "Help yourself," she nodded, but didn't move toward the food. Instead, she came to stand beside him at the window, looking out at the snow. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Elias grunted. He'd stopped thinking of snow as beautiful years ago. Now it was just weather, something to endure, to prepare for, to survive. "Your ma and brother still sleeping?" he asked. "Thomas always sleeps late. Mama says he could sleep through a thunderstorm." Emma paused, then added, "She didn't sleep much, though. I heard her crying." The simple statement hit Elias harder than it should have. He glanced at the girl, saw the worried crease between her eyes, and recognized something he knew too well. A child forced to grow up too fast, carrying burdens that shouldn't be hers. "Get some food," he said, softer this time. "Your ma's gonna need you strong." Emma nodded and moved to the stove. She served herself with the same careful efficiency she seemed to apply to everything, not taking too much, cleaning the spoon after. Elias watched her from the corner of his eye and felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. Sarah came down an hour later with Thomas in tow. The boy was more animated than his sister, his eyes wide as he took in the cabin in full daylight. "Are you a mountain man?" Thomas asked, staring at Elias with undisguised fascination. "Thomas!" Sarah's voice was sharp. "Mind your manners." "It's all right," Elias said. He looked at the boy. "I suppose I am. Do you fight bears?" "Thomas, sometimes," Elias said. "When they get into my food stores. Mostly we leave each other alone." Thomas's eyes went even wider. Sarah gave Elias a look that might have been grateful or might have been exasperated. It was hard to tell. Over breakfast, more porridge this time, with some of Elias's precious honey stirred in for the children, Sarah told him more about their situation. Her husband, James Thompson, had died 6 months ago. "Fever," she said. One day he was fine, the next day burning up, and 3 days later he was gone. She spoke matter-of-factly, but Elias heard the grief underneath, raw and unhealed. He knew that particular quality of pain, the kind that didn't fade, just became something you learned to carry. James had been a farmer, she continued, but not a very successful one. The land was poor, the harvest thin. They'd been living hand-to-mouth for years. When he died, the bank took the farm. She'd sold everything else to buy the wagon and supplies, planning to take the children to her sister's homestead near Blackston. "Martha married better than I did," Sarah said with a small, sad smile. "Her husband has a good spread, plenty of room. She wrote and said we could stay as long as we needed." "How far to Blackstone?" Elias asked. 3 days' travel in good weather. "We'd been on the road for 5 days when the axle broke." She looked down at her hands, at the simple gold wedding band she still wore. "I tried to fix it. James taught me some things about wagon repair, but—" She shook her head. The wood was rotten. It just snapped clean through. Elias nodded. I can take a look at it when the storm clears. Might be able to jury-rig something to get you to town. Relief flooded Sarah's face. I can pay you. I have a little money. Keep your money, Elias said. You'll need it. The day passed slowly. Elias wasn't used to making conversation, and long silences stretched between them. But the children filled some of the gaps. Thomas peppered him with questions about the mountain, about animals, about how he built the cabin. Emma was quieter, but he caught her watching him with those solemn eyes, taking everything in. Sarah tried to make herself useful. She cleaned the breakfast dishes without being asked, swept the floor, organized things that didn't need organizing. Elias could see she was uncomfortable accepting charity, needed to feel like she was earning her keep. By afternoon, the children were restless from being cooped up inside. Thomas kept going to the window, pressing his nose against the glass, asking when the snow would stop. Not today, Elias said. Maybe tomorrow. That evening, as the light faded and Elias lit the oil lamp that hung from the ceiling, Sarah said quietly, I should tell you something. Elias looked up from the harness he was mending. Sarah had put the children to bed early, and they were alone by the fire. She twisted the wedding ring on her finger, around and around, not meeting his eyes. My husband, she said. James, he wasn't... She stopped, started again. There are things about him I didn't know. Things I found out after he died. Elias waited. He'd learned that sometimes the best way to get the truth out of someone was just to keep quiet and let them fill the silence. He robbed a bank, Sarah said finally, the words coming out in a rush. 5 years ago in Denver. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. But after he died, men came to the farm. Bounty hunters. They said James was wanted, that he'd stolen $30,000 and hidden it somewhere. She finally looked up at Elias, and he saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. They think I know where the money is, she said. They think James told me before he died. But he didn't. I don't know anything about it. I don't want the money. I just want to get my children somewhere safe. Elias set down the harness, his mind working through the implications. These bounty hunters, they follow you? I don't know. I hoped, that once they searched the farm and didn't find anything, they'd leave us alone. But one of them, the leader, he said he'd be watching. That if I tried to run with the money, he'd find me. What's his name? Cole. He didn't give a last name. There were 3 of them, Cole and 2 others. One was big, mean-looking, called himself Dutch. The other one was younger, jumpy. Ray, I think. Elias knew the type. Bounty hunters operated in a gray area of the law, and some of them weren't much better than the outlaws they chased. If they thought Sarah knew where $30,000 was hidden, they wouldn't give up easy. That why you're running to your sisters? He asked. To get away from them. Sarah nodded. Martha's husband has ranch hands, protection. I thought if I could just get there, we'd be safe. The children would be safe. She looked at him with desperate eyes. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. If you want us to leave in the morning, I understand. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Elias looked at the woman sitting across from him, wrapped in one of his blankets, wearing a dead man's secrets like chains. He looked at the ladder leading to the loft where 2 children slept, innocent of their father's crimes. He thought about the life he'd built here, solitary, simple, safe. No complications, no entanglements. No one to worry about but himself. He should send them away. First light, storm or no storm, send them on their way before trouble found his doorstep. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. Storm's not letting up tomorrow, he said. Maybe the day after. We'll look at your wagon then, see what can be done. Sarah stared at him. You're letting us stay? Until the weather clears, Elias said. He stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with the gratitude shining in her eyes. That's all I'm promising. After that, you're on your own. He moved to bank the fire for the night, his back to her, and heard her soft voice behind him. Thank you. Elias didn't respond. He finished with the fire and settled into his chair, pulling a blanket over himself. Sarah climbed the ladder to the loft, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the dying fire. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, Elias stared at the embers and wondered what he'd just gotten himself into. 3 strangers in his cabin. Bounty hunters may be on their trail. A dead man's stolen money somewhere out there. A ghost that wouldn't rest until it was found. He'd come to this mountain to escape complications, to live a life stripped down to essentials. Just him and the wilderness, no messy human entanglements. Now here he sat, committed to helping a widow and her children, knowing full well it might bring violence to the one place he'd thought was safe. Elias closed his eyes and saw his wife's face, clear as day despite the years. Anna had always said his problem was that he cared too much, felt too deeply. That's why he made such a good soldier. He fought for something bigger than himself. And that's why leaving the military nearly destroyed him. He needed something to fight for, something to protect. When Anna and their daughter died, that last thing he cared about was torn away. So he'd come here, to this mountain, and built walls. Physical walls of logs and stone. Emotional walls of silence and solitude. Now a widow with kind eyes and 2 children who needed protecting had shown up at his door. And Elias could feel those walls starting to crack. He should have sent them away. He knew that. But Sarah's wedding ring, worn thin from years of wearing, turning and turning on her finger as she confessed her dead husband's sins. Something about that image lodged in his chest like a splinter. She was still loyal to a man who'd lied to her, who'd put her and her children in danger without her even knowing. Still wearing his ring, still carrying his name. Some loyalties, Elias thought, were heavier than others. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere above, 3 people slept in his loft. 3 people who were, for the moment, his responsibility, whether he wanted them or not. The mountain didn't care about his problems. The mountain just kept standing, indifferent and eternal, while humans played out their small dramas at its feet. Elias pulled the blanket tighter and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would come regardless, bringing whatever trouble it carried with it. For now, the storm provided cover. For now, they were safe. But Elias had been a soldier long enough to know that safety was always temporary, and storms eventually passed. When they did, he'd have decisions to make. Decisions that might require him to become someone he'd left behind 15 years ago. Someone who knew how to fight. Morning came grey and cold, but the snow had finally stopped. Elias stood on the porch, surveying the transformed landscape. Everything was buried under nearly 3 feet of white, the familiar contours of his clearing smoothed into unfamiliar shapes. The pines sagged under their burden, branches bent low, and the path to the woodshed had completely disappeared. He'd need to dig out, clear paths, make sure the roof could handle the weight. A full day's work, maybe more. Behind him, he heard the cabin door open. Thomas tumbled out, his face lighting up at the sight of all that snow. "Can I play in it?" he asked, already moving toward the steps. "After breakfast," Sarah said from the doorway. "And you'll need warmer clothes than that." The boy's face fell, but he trudged back inside obediently. Elias caught Sarah's eye and saw the weariness there. She'd slept poorly again. He'd heard her moving around in the loft during the night. "I can watch him," Elias found himself saying. "While you rest," Sarah looked surprised. "You don't have to—" "Got to dig out anyway." "Boy can help. Might as well learn something useful." It wasn't charity, Elias told himself. It was practical. If they were going to be here a few more days, the boy needed to contribute. Learn how to handle himself in deep snow. After breakfast, Elias outfitted Thomas with extra layers, one of his own wool shirts, cinched tight with rope, and a pair of work gloves that swallowed the boy's small hands. Emma watched with barely concealed envy as her brother followed Elias outside. "You can help your ma," Elias told her. "Someone needs to keep the fire going." Emma nodded, but the disappointment on her face made Elias pause. "Tomorrow you can help me check the roof," he added. "Need someone light enough to walk the ridgeline without breaking through." Her face brightened immediately, and Elias felt that uncomfortable twist in his chest again. When had he started caring whether these children were happy or not? Outside, he put Thomas to work clearing a path to the woodshed. He showed the boy how to use the shovel, not trying to lift too much at once, working in a steady rhythm that wouldn't tire you out. Thomas attacked the task with enthusiasm, his breath puffing white in the cold air. Elias worked on the main path to the lean-to, his body falling into the familiar pattern of physical labor. Scoop, lift, throw! Scoop, lift, throw! The sun climbed higher, weak and pale, but enough to make the work warm. He shed his coat and kept going. An hour in, Thomas stopped and leaned on his shovel, panting. "My arms hurt," he admitted. "That means you're doing it right," Elias said. "Take a break. Don't overdo it your first time." The boy sat on the porch steps and Elias kept working. But after a few minutes, Thomas spoke up. "My pa used to make me help with farm work," he said quietly. "I wasn't very good at it." Elias paused in his shoveling. "You're doing fine here. Pa said I was too slow." "Too clumsy?" Thomas picked at the oversized gloves. He got mad a lot. Elias set down the shovel and came to sit beside the boy on the steps. This was dangerous territory, talking about feelings, about the past. He should change the subject, get back to work. Instead, he said, "Everyone's got their own pace. Doesn't make one better than another." Thomas looked up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. "You don't get mad." "I do sometimes," Elias said honestly. "Just not about things like shoveling snow. Life's too short to waste anger on small things. What do you get mad about?" Elias thought about that. People being cruel when they don't need to be. Waste, lies. He looked at the boy. "Your pa ever hit you?" Thomas shook his head quickly. "No, he just yelled a lot. Ma said he was worried about money, about keeping us fed. That's why he was always angry." Elias nodded slowly. He'd known men like that. Good men broken by circumstances, taking their frustration out on those closest to them. It didn't excuse it, but he understood it. "Your ma loves you," Elias said. "So did your pa, probably." Sometimes people just don't know how to show it right. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you have kids?" The question landed like a physical blow. Elias felt his throat tighten. "Had a daughter once," he said finally. "Long time ago. Where is she now?" "She died. Her and her ma both." "Oh." Thomas absorbed this with the strange acceptance children sometimes had for life's hardest truths. "Were you sad?" "Still am sometimes," Elias admitted. The honesty surprised him. He hadn't talked about Anna and Mary to anyone in 15 years. "Ma cries at night," Thomas confided. "She tries to be quiet, but I hear her." Elias looked at the boy, saw the worry there, the burden of knowledge too heavy for such small shoulders. "Crying's all right," he said. "Sometimes you need to let the sadness out or it eats you up from inside. Your ma's strong. She'll be okay." "You think so?" "I know so. She got you and your sister this far, didn't she? Through a blizzard to safety. That takes strength." Thomas seemed to consider this, then nodded. After a moment, he stood up and picked up the shovel again. "I'm ready to work some more," he announced. They worked side by side until midday, when Sarah called them in for lunch. Emma had helped prepare a meal of beans and salt pork, and they ate together at the small table. Elias sitting on an upturned crate since there was only one chair. After lunch, while Sarah washed the dishes and Thomas napped by the fire, Elias retreated to his workshop. He needed time alone, space to think. The morning had unsettled him, talking to Thomas about Anna and Mary. Feeling that pull of connection he'd sworn off years ago, he was sorting through his tools, looking for something to occupy his hands when he saw it. The trunk in the corner, covered with a tarp and buried under spare traps and coils of rope. He'd shoved it there years ago and tried to forget about it. Now, almost without thinking, he cleared away the covering and opened the lid. The smell hit him first, cedar and old fabric, and underneath that, something fainter. Anna's lavender soap. She'd made it herself, grew the lavender in a little garden behind their house in Kansas. The scent was so faint now it might have been his imagination, but it stopped him cold. Inside the trunk were the things he'd salvaged from their old life. Anna's favorite shawl, Mary's baby blanket, a few books, some letters tied with ribbon, and there, wrapped in cloth at the bottom, a small wooden horse. Elias lifted it out carefully. He'd carved it for Mary when she was 4, whittled it from a piece of pine during the long winter nights when he'd been home on leave. It was rough work, not his best, but Mary had loved it. Carried it everywhere, named it Thunder, made up elaborate stories about its adventures. She'd been holding it when she died. Elias had pried it from her small, still fingers and put it in his pocket. Later, after the funeral, after Anna had followed Mary into the ground just 3 weeks later, he'd packed it away with the other things he couldn't bear to look at. Now he sat in his workshop, turning the wooden horse over in his hands, feeling the grain of the wood. The smooth spots where Mary's fingers had worn it down. He should put it back. Lock it away again. These memories led nowhere good. Instead, he found himself carrying it back to the cabin. Sarah was by the fire, mending one of Thomas's shirts. Emma sat beside her, reading from one of the 3 books Elias owned, a collection of frontier tales he'd read so many times he had them memorized. Thomas was awake now, playing with wood scraps, building something. Elias stood in the doorway, the wooden horse in his hand, and almost turned around. This was foolish, sentimental. It would only confuse things, make leaving harder when the time came. But Thomas looked up and saw him, saw what he was holding. "What's that?" the boy asked. Elias crossed the room and held out the horse. "Thought you might like this." For playing, Thomas's eyes went huge. He took the horse reverently, turned it over in his hands. "You made this?" He breathed. "Long time ago. It's perfect." Thomas immediately began galloping the horse across the floor, making soft neighing sounds. Elias glanced at Sarah and found her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but something else too, something that made him uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "That's very kind of you," she said softly. Elias shrugged, already regretting the impulse. "Just gathering dust in the workshop. Might as well get some use." But Sarah's eyes said she understood. It was more than that. And the knowing made him want to retreat to his workshop and stay there. Instead, he moved to the fireplace and began preparing the evening meal. Sarah rose to help, and they worked in silence, moving around each other in the small space. She was careful not to get in his way, and he found himself doing the same, a strange dance of courtesy between near strangers. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah and Elias sat by the fire. She was working on the mending, her needle flashing in the firelight. Elias was oiling his traps, preparing them for when he could get back to his line. "The horse," Sarah said quietly. "It was your daughter's, wasn't it?" Elias's hands stilled on the trap. He should have known she'd figure it out. "Yes," he said finally. "What was her name?" "Mary." "And your wife?" "Anna." Sarah's needle paused. "How long ago did you lose them?" 15 years this past spring. Influenza took Mary first. Anna went 3 weeks later. I think she couldn't bear to stay in a world without her daughter." The words came easier than he'd expected. Maybe because it was dark, or maybe because Sarah's own grief made her a safe confessor. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "That must have been—" She stopped, shook her head. "There aren't words for that kind of loss, are there?" "No," Elias agreed. "There aren't." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the occasional settling of the cabin in the cold. "Is that why you came here?" Sarah asked. "To the mountain? Partly. Also because I couldn't stand to be around people anymore. Everyone looking at me with pity. Everyone trying to help, to fix something that couldn't be fixed." He set down the trap, looked at his hands. "Up here nobody bothers you. Nobody asks questions. You can just exist, without having to pretend you're all right." "And are you?" Sarah asked gently. "All right?" Elias considered the question seriously. "I'm alive. I survive. That's about all I can manage." "That's more than just surviving," Sarah said. "You built this cabin. You provide for yourself. You have skills, purpose. That's living, not just surviving. Maybe." Elias wasn't convinced. "What about you? How are you managing?" Sarah's hands stilled on the mending. "Some days better than others. The children keep me going. If I didn't have them—" She didn't finish the thought. "James wasn't a perfect husband, but he was mine. We had plans, dreams, and then he was just gone, and I found out he wasn't who I thought he was." "The robbery," Elias said. "Yes, it makes me question everything. Did I ever really know him? Were we ever really happy, or was I just fooling myself?" She set down the mending, pressed her palms to her eyes. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear all this. It's all right," Elias said. And surprisingly, it was. There was something almost comfortable about sitting in the dark with someone who understood grief, who didn't need platitudes or false cheerfulness. Sarah lowered her hands and looked at him. "Thank you. For the horse. For Thomas." It meant something. Elias nodded, uncomfortable again. "It was just a toy." "No," Sarah said firmly. "It wasn't." She was right, and they both knew it. The wooden horse was the first crack in the wall Elias had built around his heart. A small crack maybe, but definite, and sitting there in the firelight, watching Sarah return to her mending, Elias wondered if maybe, just maybe, a crack wasn't such a terrible thing after all. The days developed a rhythm. Elias wasn't sure when it happened. Exactly. Just that one morning he woke up and the presence of others in his cabin didn't feel quite so jarring. Sarah proved herself capable in ways that earned his quiet respect. She could cook with almost nothing, stretch supplies he would have burned through in days. She kept the cabin cleaner than it had been in years, but never touched his things without asking. She understood boundaries, respected his need for silence. Emma absorbed everything like a sponge. She watched how Elias split wood, how he banked the fire at night, how he read the weather in the clouds. She asked questions, but good ones, practical, thoughtful. She reminded him of himself at that age, always wanting to understand how things worked. Thomas was pure energy, barely contained. He followed Elias around like a shadow, chattering about everything and nothing. Normally that would have driven Elias mad, but the boy had a way of asking questions that made you think. And he was genuinely trying to help, to be useful, even when his small hands made the work harder rather than easier. On the 4th day after the storm, Elias decided it was time to teach Emma to shoot. He'd been watching her, seeing how she moved, careful, controlled, with a steadiness unusual for her age. She had the temperament for it. And on this mountain, knowing how to handle a rifle wasn't optional. It was survival. "You ever fire a gun?" he asked her after breakfast. Emma shook her head. "Pa didn't believe in women shooting. Said it wasn't proper." Elias snorted. "Proper doesn't mean much when a bear's coming at you." "Come on." He took his father's Winchester from above the door, along with a box of ammunition. Sarah watched from the table, worry evident on her face. "She's too young," Sarah said. "She's old enough to learn," Elias replied. "I won't let anything happen to her." Outside, he set up a target against a tree at the far edge of the clearing, a piece of bark with a charcoal circle drawn on it. Emma stood beside him, trying to hide her nervousness. "First rule," Elias said, "never point a gun at anything you don't intend to kill. Second rule, always assume it's loaded. Third rule, know your target and what's beyond it." He went through the basics, how to hold the rifle, how to sight along the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. Emma listened with fierce concentration, absorbing every word. "It's going to kick," he warned, "and it's going to be loud. Don't let either thing scare you. Just focus on the target." He helped her position the rifle, showed her how to tuck it tight against her shoulder. Her arms shook slightly from the weight, but she held steady. "Whenever you're ready," he said quietly. The shot cracked through the morning air, and Emma staggered back from the recoil. But she didn't drop the rifle, didn't cry out. Just steadied herself and looked down range. She'd missed the target completely, hit the tree about a foot to the left. "Not bad for first time," Elias said. "You flinched right before you fired. Try again, and this time don't think about the noise. Just think about where you want the bullet to go." They worked for an hour. By the end, Emma was consistently hitting the tree, and once she clipped the edge of the charcoal circle. Her shoulder would be bruised tomorrow, but her face was glowing with accomplishment. "Can I try again tomorrow?" she asked. "Every day if you want," Elias said. "Practice makes the difference between a good shot and a great one." As they walked back to the cabin, Emma said quietly, "Thank you for teaching me. Might save your life someday," Elias replied. "That's reason enough." But there was more to it than that, and he knew it. Teaching Emma to shoot had awakened something in him, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. He was passing on knowledge, skills, The same way his father had taught him, and his father before that. Legacy, he thought. The word felt strange, rusty from disuse. That afternoon, while Emma helped her mother and Thomas napped, Elias sat in his workshop, ostensibly sharpening tools. In reality, he was thinking about the rifle, his father's Winchester. Given to him the day he'd left for basic training, 3 generations of Canes having owned it before him. He'd planned to give it to Mary one day, teach her the same way his father had taught him. But Mary had died, and the rifle had hung above his door for 15 years, gathering dust. A reminder of broken lines, failed legacies. Now Emma's hands had held it. Her eye had sighted down the barrel. Her finger had squeezed the trigger. It felt right in a way that unsettled him. He was still sitting there, lost in thought, when Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Can I come in?" she asked. Elias nodded, and she stepped into the small space, looking around at his tools, his projects in various states of completion. "You're very skilled," she observed. "Everything in here is so precise." "Has to be," Elias said. "Bad work can get you killed up here. No room for sloppy." Sarah ran her fingers along the workbench, then turned to face him. "I wanted to ask you something." "About Emma." Elias waited. "Teaching her to shoot," Sarah said carefully. "I know it's practical. I know it makes sense up here. But," she paused, choosing her words, "she's only 8. She's already lost so much. I don't want her to lose her childhood too." Elias considered this. "What did you do when you were 8? Help my mother with cooking, cleaning? Watched my younger siblings? So you were working, contributing. That's different, is it?" Elias leaned back against the workbench. "Look, I'm not trying to turn your daughter into a soldier, but this is hard country. Knowing how to protect yourself, how to handle a rifle, those aren't just skills. They're confidence, respect. Your daughter deserves to feel capable." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard. Watching her grow up so fast. She's stronger than you think," Elias said. "Both of them are." "You raised them well." "James and I raised them," Sarah corrected softly. For all his faults, he loved them. He was always so worried, so stressed. I think that's why he did it. The robbery. He couldn't stand watching us struggle anymore. "Doesn't excuse it," Elias said. "No," Sarah agreed. "But it helps me understand. And understanding is better than hating him for what he did." She moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered clearing. "You know what's strange? I feel safer here than I have in months, maybe years. Even knowing those men might be looking for us, even in the middle of nowhere, I feel safe." Elias didn't know what to say to that. The cabin was safe, true enough. He'd built it that way, positioned it with sight lines, escape routes, old habits from a life he'd left behind. But safe from what? The mountain could kill you in 100 different ways. And if those bounty hunters came, he pushed the thought away. "Not yet. Not while they still had time. We should check your wagon soon," he said instead. "Weather's clearing. Another few days, the snow will pack down enough to make the trip." Sarah nodded, but she looked sad. "Back to the real world." "This is the real world," Elias said. "Out there's just more people." She smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "You really don't like people much, do you?" "I like them fine from a distance. What about us?" "We're not at a distance." Elias met her eyes. "No," he admitted. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Elias couldn't quite name. Then Sarah looked away, breaking whatever spell had fallen. "I should get back," she said. "Thomas will be waking up soon." After she left, Elias sat alone in his workshop for a long time, thinking about safety and distance and the walls he'd built that were starting to feel less like protection and more like prison. That evening, Thomas came down with a fever. It started as sniffles at dinner, but by the time they put him to bed, he was burning up and shaking with chills. Sarah tried to hide her panic, but Elias saw it in the way her hands trembled as she felt his forehead, in the tightness around her eyes. "It's probably just a cold," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Elias looked at the boy's flushed face and felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd seen this before, the fever, the chills, The way it came on fast. Mary had started just like this. "I need to go out," he said abruptly. "Now? It's almost dark. There's willow bark growing near the creek, and some other plants that'll help bring the fever down." He was already pulling on his coat. "Keep him warm. Get liquids in him if you can. I'll be back within 2 hours." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Elias, you don't have to—" "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "I do." He went out into the gathering darkness with his rifle and a canvas bag, moving fast through the snow. The creek was a mile east, and the light was fading quickly. Normally he wouldn't risk this, traveling at dusk when you couldn't see clearly, when animals were most active. But Thomas's fever-bright eyes had triggered something in him, a desperate need to do something, anything, to prevent what had happened to Mary from happening again. He knew it was irrational. Thomas probably just had a cold. Children got sick all the time and recovered, but knowing that didn't slow his pace. He found the willow trees by the frozen creek and stripped bark from the younger branches, filling his bag. Then he moved upstream to where he remembered seeing feverfew growing in the summer. He had to dig through snow to find it, working by feel in the near darkness, but eventually his fingers closed on the dried stems. On the way back, he nearly walked into an elk. The big animal snorted and crashed away through the trees, and Elias realized how careless he'd been, how focused on his task. That kind of inattention could get you killed, but all he could think about was getting back, getting the medicine to Thomas. He burst through the cabin door to find Sarah sitting by Thomas's bedside in the loft, Emma pressed against her mother's side. Both of them looked up with frightened faces. "How is he?" Elias asked, already moving to the fire to heat water. "Hot," Sarah said. "And he's saying things that don't make sense." Elias climbed the ladder and felt Thomas's forehead. The boy was burning up, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Pa," Thomas mumbled. "Pa, I'm sorry." "He thinks you're his father," Sarah whispered. Something twisted in Elias's chest. "It's all right, son," he said gently. "You just rest now." He went back down and prepared the willow bark tea, adding the feverfew and a touch of honey to make it palatable. When it was ready, he brought it up to the loft. Between them, he and Sarah managed to get some of the tea into Thomas. The boy coughed and sputtered, but he swallowed enough to make a difference. "Now we wait," Elias said. Sarah looked at him with desperate eyes. "Will he be all right?" "I don't know," Elias said honestly, "but we've done what we can." The night that followed was the longest Elias had experienced since Anna and Mary died. He sat in his rocking chair by the fire, while Sarah stayed in the loft with Thomas and Emma. Every hour or so she would come down to heat more tea, and Elias would see the exhaustion and fear written on her face. He wanted to tell her it would be all right, that Thomas would be fine. But he'd said those words before to Anna, and they'd been lies, so instead he just made sure the fire stayed high. The water stayed hot, and the medicine was always ready. Somewhere around midnight, he dozed off in his chair. He woke to find Emma standing beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Kane," she whispered. The fever broke. Elias was up the ladder before he fully registered the words. Thomas lay on the pallet, his face pale but no longer flushed. His breathing was even, natural. When Elias touched his forehead, it was cool. Sarah sat against the wall, her face streaked with tears. "He's going to be all right," she said, her voice breaking. "He's going to be all right." Elias felt something unknot in his chest, something that had been wound tight since the moment he'd seen Thomas's fevered face. "Yes," he said. "He is." Sarah covered her face with her hands and sobbed, not sad tears but relief so profound it had to escape somehow. Emma moved to her mother's side, and Elias quietly climbed back down the ladder, giving them privacy. He sat in his chair and stared at the fire, feeling shaky and drained. He'd been terrified, genuinely deeply terrified in a way he hadn't been since Anna died, because somewhere over the past week these three strangers had become more than just people sheltering in his cabin. They'd become, what? Not family, exactly. He barely knew them, but something that mattered. An hour later, Sarah came down the ladder. Her eyes were red, but she was calm now. "Thank you," she said. "If you hadn't gone out for that medicine," He'd probably have been fine anyway, Elias said gruffly. Maybe, Sarah allowed. But you didn't know that when you left. You risked yourself, in the dark. For my son. Elias didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Sarah crossed the room and did something unexpected. She took his hand, squeezed it gently. I see you, Elias Kane, she said softly. I see the man you pretend not to be. Then she went back up the ladder, leaving Elias sitting in his chair, staring at his hand where she'd touched it, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in a way he couldn't quite understand. Outside, the night was quiet and cold. Inside, 4 people slept under one roof, a family that wasn't a family, held together by circumstance and a growing web of connections none of them had planned for. And Elias, who had spent 15 years convincing himself he needed no one, sat by the fire and wondered when exactly he'd started caring again, when exactly he'd started feeling alive. Thomas recovered quickly after that, regaining his energy and appetite within a few days. But something had changed in the cabin's atmosphere. The crisis had bound them together in a way that couldn't be undone, even if they'd wanted to. Sarah moved through the space with a quiet ease now, no longer asking permission for every small thing. She'd taken over the cooking entirely, and Elias found himself looking forward to meals in a way he hadn't in years. Not just because the food was good, though. It was, but because of what came with it. Conversation, laughter, the simple comfort of sharing a table with others. She'd found his mother's old recipe book tucked away on a high shelf, pages yellowed with age. Some recipes written in a spidery hand that was almost impossible to read. Elias had forgotten he even had it, may I? Sarah had asked, holding the book like it was precious. Elias had nodded, throat tight, and watched as she paged through it with reverent fingers. Now the cabin smelled like things he'd forgotten. Bread baking, stew simmering, herbs hanging to dry near the fire. Smells that turned the cabin from a shelter into a home. One evening, about 2 weeks after the storm, Sarah made something from the book that filled the cabin with the scent of cinnamon and apples. Elias sat at his workbench, supposedly mending a harness, but really just breathing in the smell and remembering, his mother making the same dish on cold winter evenings. His father coming in from the barn, snow on his coat, stopping to kiss his mother's cheek before washing up for dinner. The way the house had felt, warm, full, alive with the everyday rhythms of family, he'd forgotten that, locked it away with all the other memories that hurt too much to touch. It's called Apple Brown Betty, Sarah said, appearing in the workshop doorway. The recipe was in your mother's book. I hope you don't mind. I don't mind, Elias said quickly. It smells... He stopped, unable to find the words. Like home, Sarah suggested gently. Yes, she smiled. Good. That's what I was hoping for. She turned to go, but Elias found himself speaking. My mother used to make that. Every fall when the apples came in, he stared at the harness in his hands. I haven't tasted it in 30 years. Sarah came back into the workshop, leaned against the doorframe. What was she like? Your mother? Elias thought about that. Strong, practical. She ran the farm when my father was working the mines. Kept us all fed and clothed on next to nothing and never complained. Never made us feel poor even when we were. She taught you well, Sarah observed. You have all those qualities. Elias snorted. Not sure about that. I am. Sarah crossed her arms. You live alone on a mountain and provide for yourself. You built this cabin, maintain it, feed yourself. And when 3 strangers showed up needing help, you gave it, even though every instinct probably told you not to. Basic decency, Elias muttered. No, Sarah said firmly. Decency would have been giving us supplies and directions to town. What you did was more than that. You opened your home. You taught Emma to shoot. You saved Thomas's life. That's not just decency, Elias. That's goodness. The words settled over him, uncomfortable and warm at the same time. Elias didn't think of himself as good. He thought of himself as a man who'd failed to protect the people he loved, and had run away from that failure. But looking at Sarah's face, seeing the sincerity there, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, running away wasn't the whole story. Maybe he'd also been surviving, enduring, waiting for a reason to come back to the world. The brown Betty's probably ready, he said, changing the subject because the emotion was getting too heavy. Sarah smiled like she knew exactly what he was doing, but she let it go. Come on then, before it gets cold. They ate together that evening, the four of them squeezed around the small table with Emma sitting on an upturned bucket. The brown Betty was perfect, sweet and tart and warm, exactly like Elias remembered from his childhood. Thomas declared it the best thing he'd ever eaten. Emma ate 2 helpings, and Elias felt something in his chest that took him a moment to identify. Contentment. Simple, uncomplicated contentment with the moment he was in. It had been so long since he'd felt that. He'd almost forgotten what it was like. After dinner, while Sarah washed dishes and the children played with wood scraps by the fire, Elias found himself telling stories. About growing up in Kansas, about his father and mother, about the farm and the hard winters and the good years when the harvest came in strong. Emma and Thomas listened with rapt attention, and Sarah paused in her work to listen too. And Elias realized he was talking more than he had in 15 years. Words flowing out of him like a dam had broken. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah sat in the rocking chair, the one Elias had made 15 years ago for a solitude that seemed distant now, and worked on something she'd pulled from her pack. A quilt, Elias realized. She was piecing together fabric scraps with tiny, precise stitches. "What are you making?" he asked. Sarah held up the quilt so he could see. It was a simple pattern, squares of different colors and fabrics sewn together. But there was something familiar about it. "I found this in your trunk," Sarah said quietly. "The day Thomas got sick, I was looking for extra blankets. I hope you don't mind, I should have asked first." Elias stared at the quilt. He remembered it now. Anna had started it the winter before she died, piecing it together from fabric scraps, old dresses, worn shirts, anything she could salvage. She planned to finish it for Mary's bed. She never got the chance. "You don't have to," Elias started. "I want to," Sarah interrupted gently. "If you'll let me. I'll follow her pattern exactly. Add to what she started, but not change it. Just finish what she began." Elias looked at the quilt, at Sarah's careful stitches blending with Anna's older ones. The two women separated by years and death, but connected by thread and fabric, and the simple act of creating something warm. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "Finish it." Sarah's face softened. "When it's done, would you like to keep it? Or should I?" "We'll see," Elias said. He couldn't think that far ahead. Couldn't imagine what would happen when the snow melted enough for them to leave. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Sarah sewing, Elias pretending to read one of his books, but really just watching her work. There was something peaceful about it, the domestic scene, the quiet companionship. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said eventually. "All right, the rocking chair. You said you made it your first winter here. Were you planning to live alone forever? Or did you hope—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "Did you think you might find someone eventually? Start over?" Elias considered the question honestly. "At first I thought I might die up here. Not on purpose. I wasn't trying to end things. But I didn't much care if I lived either. The chair was just something to do. Something to keep my hands busy. And now? Now?" Elias looked around the cabin, at the children's things scattered about, at Sarah sewing Anna's quilt by the fire, at all the small changes that had transformed his hermit's den into something else. "Now I don't know what I think," Sarah nodded slowly. James used to say that not knowing was the hardest thing. That he'd rather have bad news than no news, certainty than possibility. "What do you think?" "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that not knowing means there's still room for hope. For things to surprise you." James wanted everything nailed down, predictable. But life isn't like that. Sometimes the best things are the ones you never planned for. She looked up from her sewing and met his eyes. Like ending up in a cabin on a mountain, with a man who claims he wants to be alone but keeps a wooden horse from his daughter in his workshop. Who teaches my daughter to shoot and saves my son's life, and makes us feel safer than we've felt in years. Elias felt heat creep up his neck. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Sarah said quietly. "You did what a good man would do. There's a difference. She went back to her sewing, and Elias sat with those words, turning them over in his mind like stones. A good man. He'd been a good soldier once, a good husband, a good father. Then he'd failed at the last two, and he'd stopped thinking of himself as good at anything except surviving. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe surviving took its own kind of goodness. And maybe, just maybe, he was capable of more than just enduring. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Winter was settling in deep now, the cold relentless. They'd be here for weeks yet, maybe longer. The thought should have made Elias anxious, restless. Instead, he felt almost grateful, because whatever was happening here, whatever connections were being forged, he wasn't ready for them to end. Not yet, maybe not ever. 3 weeks passed. The snow showed no signs of melting, and a part of Elias, a part he wouldn't admit out loud, was glad for it. He'd settled into a routine with Sarah and the children that felt natural now. Mornings, he'd go out to check his traps or hunt, sometimes taking Emma with him. She was proving to be a natural with the rifle, her shots getting more accurate each day. She moved quietly through the forest too, learning to read tracks, to understand the language of the wilderness. Thomas usually stayed back with Sarah, but Elias had started teaching him small things: how to properly stack wood so it stayed dry, how to maintain tools, how to read the sky for weather changes. The boy soaked up knowledge like a sponge, eager to please, eager to be useful. And Sarah had transformed the cabin in ways both large and small. The quilt was taking shape, a beautiful patchwork of old and new. She'd reorganized his supplies with an efficiency that actually made sense. She'd even planted some herbs in a makeshift indoor garden by the window, coaxing green life from the seeds she'd saved from her farm. The cabin felt alive in a way it never had before. One afternoon, Elias was working in his lean-to when Sarah appeared with 2 cups of coffee. "Peace offering," she said. Handing him one, Elias raised an eyebrow. "What did you do?" "Nothing yet, but I need to ask you something, and you might not like it." Elias took the coffee and waited. Sarah took a breath. "The quilt. It's nearly finished. Another few days of work, maybe. And I was thinking," she paused, "when it's done, I'd like you to keep it. We talked about this. I said we'd see. I know what you said. But I've been watching you look at it when you think I'm not paying attention. And I see your face. This is part of your wife, part of your daughter, part of your history." Sarah set down her cup. "If we leave and I take it with us, you'll be giving away another piece of them." "I can't let you do that." Elias felt something catch in his throat. "You put work into it. It's yours now, too." "Then think of it as a gift," Sarah said softly. "From me to you. Something to remember." She stopped, looked away. "Something to remember us by." The words hung in the air between them. "Remember us by." As if their leaving was inevitable, which of course it was. Spring would come eventually. The snow would melt, and Sarah would take her children to her sister's homestead, where they belonged, where they'd be safe. The thought of the cabin empty again, silent again, made Elias's chest tight. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Sarah nodded and left him to his work. But Elias couldn't focus after that. He kept thinking about the quilt, about Anna's stitches and Sarah's blending together, about the metaphor of old grief and new possibility woven into fabric. That evening, Emma asked if she could practice shooting again. The light was fading, but Elias agreed. He needed to do something, to move, to not think about quilts and leaving and the hollow feeling in his gut. They went out to the clearing, and Emma ran through her drills with focused precision. She was good enough now that Elias was running out of things to teach her at this basic level. "You're a natural," he told her as she reloaded. "Better than I was at your age." Emma's face glowed with pride. "Really, really. Your hands are steady, your breathing's controlled, and you don't flinch anymore. Those are things that take most people years to learn." "Pa would have hated this," Emma said quietly, lowering the rifle. "He always said I should be more ladylike. Learn to sew and cook, not—" She gestured at the rifle. "You can do both," Elias said. "Being capable doesn't make you less of a woman. It just makes you more prepared for whatever life throws at you." Emma considered this. Do you think we'll really leave? When spring comes, the question surprised him. Your ma's planning to go to your aunt's place. That's always been the plan, I know. But Emma looked up at him with those serious eyes. I like it here. I feel safe here. And Thomas does too. He told me he wishes you were our pa. Elias felt like he'd been kicked in the chest. Emma, I'm not saying I want that, Emma clarified quickly. I had a pa. I don't want to replace him. But Thomas is little. He doesn't remember pa as much as I do. And you've been... She struggled for words. You've been good to us, patient. You teach me things. You saved Thomas. You make Ma smile again. Your Ma should smile, Elias said, his voice rough. She's been through a lot. So have you, Emma said with the blunt honesty of children. Ma told me about your family, about how they died. I'm sorry that happened to you. They stood in the fading light, and Elias didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a child that her presence, her brother's presence, her mother's presence, that all of it had woken something in him he'd thought was dead forever? Thank you, he said finally, for being kind, for understanding. Emma nodded, then shouldered the rifle again. One more round. They practiced until it was too dark to see the targets clearly, then walked back to the cabin together. Emma chattered about what she'd learned, about the next thing she wanted to try. And Elias listened and felt a profound sense of rightness about the moment. Inside, Sarah had dinner ready. Venison stew with vegetables, bread fresh from the Dutch oven. They ate together, and Thomas told an elaborate story about the fort he was building with wood scraps. And Sarah laughed at something Elias said, and for a moment it felt so much like a family that Elias had to look away. After dinner, after the children went to bed, Elias found himself alone with Sarah again. She was working on the quilt, as she did most evenings now. Emma said something today. Elias began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Sarah's hands stilled on the fabric. What did she say? That Thomas wishes I was his father. Sarah's expression softened. He said as much to me too. I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable. It does, Elias admitted. But not in a bad way, more in a, I don't know how to do this way. Do what? This? Elias gestured around the cabin. Care about people again. Let them in. I've spent 15 years building walls, Sarah, and you three you walked right through them like they weren't even there. Sarah set down the quilt. Would you like us to leave? When the weather clears enough, I can try to make it to town. No, Elias said quickly. Too quickly. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, he paused, trying to find the right words. I'm saying I'm afraid. I lost everything once. The people I loved most in the world. And I told myself I'd never let myself care like that again, because I couldn't survive losing anyone else. And now, Sarah asked softly. Now I'm terrified, Elias admitted, because I'm starting to care about Emma and her shooting, about Thomas and his questions, about you and... He stopped, the words catching. About me and what? Sarah prompted gently. Elias met her eyes. About you and the way you make this cabin feel like a home. The way you smile when you think no one's watching. The way you're so damn strong even when you're scared. Sarah drew in a sharp breath. Elias, I know it's too fast, he continued, the words coming out in a rush now that he'd started. I know you're still grieving your husband. I know you're just here because of the storm, and once spring comes, you'll need to move on. But I needed to say it. Needed you to know that these weeks, they've mattered. You've mattered. Silence fell. Sarah stared at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. James has been gone 6 months, she said finally. And you're right, I'm still grieving, but not in the way you might think. I'm grieving the man I thought he was, the life I thought we had. Because it turns out I didn't really know him at all. She stood up and crossed to where Elias sat. What I do know is that I feel safer with you than I ever did with him. I trust you more. In 3 weeks, you've shown me more genuine kindness than I got in 10 years of marriage. Sarah, let me finish, she said. I'm not ready to think about what comes next, for either of us. But I need you to know that this time here with you, it's shown me what I've been missing. What life could be like with someone who's truly good. She reached out and cupped his face with her hand, her palm warm against his cheek. So I'm afraid too, she whispered. Afraid of leaving. Afraid of staying, afraid of wanting something I might not be able to have. Elias covered her hand with his own. We don't have to figure it all out tonight. No, Sarah agreed. We don't. She pulled her hand back, but slowly, reluctantly. Then she picked up the quilt again and settled back into her chair. They sat together in the firelight, not speaking, but the silence between them was full of unspoken things. Hopes, fears, possibilities. Outside, the wind howled and the snow continued to fall. But inside the cabin, something was growing that neither the cold nor the darkness could touch, something that felt dangerously like love. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Elias woke early as always, but this time to the sound of Sarah already moving around downstairs. He climbed down from the loft. He'd given it back to Sarah and the children a week ago, insisting he preferred sleeping by the fire, and found her making coffee. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Sarah shook her head. Too much on my mind. They drank coffee together in the pre-dawn quiet, and Elias tried not to think about the conversation from the night before, about the way her hand had felt against his face, warm and gentle, about the things they'd admitted to each other. After breakfast, Elias announced he was going to check on Sarah's wagon. The weather had been clear for 3 days now, and the snow had packed down enough to make travel possible. He couldn't put it off any longer. I'll come with you, Sarah said. They left Emma in charge of Thomas and headed out together. The wagon was where Sarah had said, about 2 miles southwest, near a frozen stream. It took them an hour to reach it, trudging through deep snow. The wagon was in worse shape than Elias had hoped. The broken axle was only part of the problem. One wheel was cracked, the canvas cover had torn in several places, and the supplies inside had been ransacked by animals. Can it be fixed? Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. The axle, maybe. But that wheel's done, and you'd need a new canvas. Elias walked around the wagon assessing. Even if I could patch it together, it wouldn't make it far. Certainly not all the way to Blackstone. Sarah's shoulders sagged. So we're stuck until spring. Once the snow melts and the ground firms up, I can help you get to town. But not before then. He expected Sarah to be upset, but instead she just nodded slowly. All right. They started unloading what was left of Sarah's supplies, some clothes, a few cooking implements, personal items. Elias was pulling out a bundle when something fell from between the blankets and landed in the snow at his feet. A wanted poster. He picked it up, and his blood went cold. The sketch showed a man's face, rough features, hard eyes. Below it read, James Thompson, wanted for bank robbery, $500 reward, but it was the paper underneath that made his stomach drop. Another poster, this one showing a woman's face. Sarah's face. Sarah Thompson, wanted for questioning. Suspected accomplice. Elias looked up at Sarah and found her staring at the posters, her face pale. I can explain, she said quickly. You said you didn't know about the robbery. I didn't. Not until after he died. But those... She gestured at the posters. Those came later. The bounty hunters must have convinced the law that I was involved. That I helped him hide the money. Elias studied the poster with her face on it. Did you? No. Sarah's voice was desperate. I swear to you, Elias, I knew nothing about any of it. James never told me. I found out from the bounty hunters after the funeral. Elias wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her. But he'd been lied to before, trusted when he shouldn't have. There's more, Sarah said quietly. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I found this in James's things, after he died. I didn't show it to anyone. She handed it to Elias. It was a letter written in a shaky hand. Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I need you to know I never meant for any of this. The robbery, the running, the lies, I did it for you and the kids. We were going to lose the farm, lose everything. I thought I could take the money, buy us a fresh start somewhere else. But it went wrong. A guard got shot. Not by me, but I was there. I'm guilty anyway. The money's hidden where we scattered Ma's ashes. You'll know the place. Take it, use it for the kids. Get them somewhere safe. Tell them I loved them. Tell them I'm sorry. James Elias read the letter twice, then looked at Sarah. Where did you scatter his mother's ashes? I don't know, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. He never told me. She died before we were married. He mentioned once that he scattered her ashes somewhere meaningful, but he never said where. So the money, I have no idea where it is, Sarah finished. And those bounty hunters, Cole and the others, they don't believe me. They think I'm lying, that I'm waiting for things to cool down before I claim it. Elias felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. Why didn't you tell me this before? I was ashamed, Sarah said brokenly, and scared. I thought if you knew the law was looking for me, you'd send us away. And we had nowhere else to go, Elias. Nowhere. Elias walked away from her, needing space to think. This changed everything. She wasn't just a widow with bad luck. She was wanted by the law, hunted by bounty hunters who thought she was sitting on $30,000, and she'd been lying to him. Maybe not about the big things, but by omission. That was still lying. Elias, please, Sarah said behind him. I should have told you sooner. I know that. But everything I said last night about feeling safe with you, about caring, that was all true. I swear it! Elias turned to face her. She looked terrified, vulnerable, and completely sincere, and that was the problem. Because despite everything, despite the wanted poster, despite the lies, despite the danger she'd brought to his door, he believed her. Those bounty hunters, he said. Tell me everything about them. Relief flooded Sarah's face. They came to the farm about a week after James died. 3 of them, like I said. Cole was the leader, tall, maybe 40, with grey at his temples. Cold eyes, he did most of the talking. The big one, Dutch, he tore the place apart looking for the money. Broke furniture, ripped up floorboards. And Ray, the young one, he kept watching me like, she shivered, like he was waiting for an excuse. What did Cole say? That they knew James had hidden the money somewhere. That if I cooperated, told them where it was, they'd make sure the law went easy on me. But if I didn't... Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. He said I'd hang right alongside James's memory, and my children would be orphans. Elias felt cold fury building in his chest. He threatened your children. Not directly, but the implication was clear. Sarah looked at him with desperate eyes. That's when I decided to run. I sold everything I could, bought the wagon, told people I was going to my sister's. I thought if I could just disappear, start over somewhere they'd never find us. Did they follow you? I don't think so. At least I didn't see anyone. But Cole said something before I left. He said, "You can run, Mrs. Thompson, but we're patient men. And $30,000 buys a lot of patience." Elias processed this information, his mind already working through scenarios. 3 men, experienced bounty hunters, ruthless enough to threaten children. They'd be tracking Sarah, waiting for her to lead them to the money, and if they found her here at his cabin, he pushed the thought away. Deal with what's in front of you first. Plan for what might come later. We need to get back, he said. No, Sarah didn't argue. They gathered what they could carry from the wagon and started the trek back to the cabin. Elias set a hard pace, scanning the tree line constantly. He felt exposed out here, vulnerable. Halfway back, he stopped so suddenly that Sarah nearly ran into him. "What is it?" she whispered. Elias pointed. In the snow ahead, crossing their trail from earlier, were fresh tracks. Boot prints. 3 sets. His blood turned to ice. "They're here," he said quietly. Sarah made a small, frightened sound. "How did they find us?" "Doesn't matter now." Elias studied the tracks. "They were heading northeast toward the cabin. How long ago did we leave?" 2 hours, maybe. The tracks were fresh, maybe an hour old, which meant the men were at the cabin right now or close to it, with Emma and Thomas inside. "Stay behind me," Elias said, unsling his rifle. "Stay quiet. If something happens..." "Nothing's going to happen," Sarah said fiercely. "We're getting our children back." They moved through the forest like ghosts, using the trees for cover. Elias's military training came back automatically. How to move silently, how to use terrain, how to approach a potentially hostile situation. As they got closer to the cabin, Elias held up a hand. Sarah stopped behind him. Through the trees, he could see the clearing. 3 horses were tied to his fence. 3 men stood on his porch, and the cabin door was open. Elias felt rage rise up in him, hot and consuming. Those men were in his home, with his, With Emma and Thomas, he forced himself to think tactically. 3 armed men. He had 1 rifle, 8 rounds. Sarah had a pistol he'd given her for protection, but she wasn't a practiced shot. Rushing in would get them killed. Or worse, get the children killed. We need to get closer, he whispered to Sarah. See what we're dealing with. They crept forward until they were at the edge of the clearing. Close enough to hear voices, telling you they're not here. Emma's voice, high and scared but defiant. Little girl, I'm losing my patience. A man's voice, cold and controlled. Cold, probably. Your mother came this way. We tracked her wagon to this cabin. Now where is she? She went to town, Emma insisted. With the mountain man. They left this morning and left you children alone? A different voice, rougher, Dutch. That doesn't sound very responsible. We're fine alone, Emma said. We don't need watching. There was a pause, then the sound of heavy footsteps inside the cabin. Nice place, Dutch said. For a hermit. But I'm thinking maybe this hermit's been keeping your ma company. That true, little girl? Your ma been keeping the old mountain man warm at night. Shut your mouth, a third voice snapped. Ray, the young one. He sounded nervous. Cole, maybe we should just wait. They'll come back eventually, and waste time freezing our asses off. Dutch growled. I say we take the kids. Leave a note. Tell Mama Bear to come find us if she wants them back. She'll lead us right to the money to save them. No! Thomas's voice now terrified. No, don't take us, please. Elias heard a scuffle, then a cry of pain. Thomas, the rage that filled him then was beyond anything he'd felt in 15 years. Beyond rational thought, beyond control. He started to stand, to charge the cabin, but Sarah grabbed his arm. Wait, she hissed. You go in shooting, you might hit the children. She was right. Elias knew she was right. But hearing Thomas cry, hearing Emma's scared voice, I'll go in, Sarah said. Draw them out. You get into position, get the children clear. Then we deal with these men. It was a terrible plan. It put Sarah in immediate danger. But Elias couldn't think of a better one. All right, he said. Give me 2 minutes to circle around, then call out to them. He moved through the trees, using the forest cover to approach the cabin from the side. He positioned himself where he had a clear line of sight to the porch and the door. Then he waited, rifle ready, while Sarah stepped out of the tree line. Looking for me? She called out. The reaction was immediate. All 3 men emerged from the cabin. Cole first, tall, graying, just as Sarah described. Dutch behind him, massive and mean-looking. Ray bringing up the rear, young and jumpy, his hand on his pistol. Mrs. Thompson, Cole said smoothly. How kind of you to join us. We were just getting acquainted with your children. Lovely kids. Be a shame if anything happened to them. Let them go, Sarah said, walking forward. I'm here. That's what you wanted. What I want, Cole said, is to know where your husband hid that money. I don't know where it is, Sarah said. I've told you that, and I didn't believe you then either. Cole descended the porch steps. But maybe we can jog your memory. Dutch, bring the boy out. Dutch disappeared back into the cabin. A moment later he emerged, dragging Thomas by the arm. The boy was crying, terrified. Elias centered his rifle on Dutch's head. 1 shot, that's all it would take. But Emma was still inside, probably with Ray. 1 shot would start a firefight, and Emma could get caught in the crossfire. Let him go, Sarah demanded. Tell me where the money is, Cole countered. I don't know. Cole nodded to Dutch. The big man pulled out a knife. That's when Elias realized 2 things simultaneously. First, these men weren't just going to threaten. They were actually going to hurt Thomas to make Sarah talk. Second, he couldn't let that happen, no matter the cost. He stood up from his hiding spot and called out, Let the boy go, or I put a bullet through your friend's skull. All 3 men spun toward his voice. Elias had the rifle trained on Dutch, finger on the trigger. Who the hell? Cole started. The mountain man? Elias said coldly. This is my property. Those are my... He paused, then said it. Those are my people, and you're going to let them go. Right now, Cole studied him, assessing. Or what? You shoot Dutch, Ray shoots the girl inside. Then I shoot you. Nobody wins. Maybe, Elias said. But Dutch definitely loses. Dutch's eyes narrowed. Cole, shut up. Cole held up a hand. Let's all stay calm here. Nobody needs to die today. Then let the children go, Elias said. Can't do that, Cole replied. Not until Mrs. Thompson tells us where the money is. She doesn't know where it is, Elias said. I believe her. Touching, Cole said. But irrelevant. She knows, or she'll figure it out. Either way, we're not leaving empty-handed. Elias made a decision. A terrible, risky decision. But looking at Thomas's terrified face, at Sarah's desperate eyes, at his cabin violated by these men, it was the only decision he could make. I was Delta Force, he said quietly. 30 years, most of it classified. You know what that means. Cole's expression flickered. You're lying. Am I? Elias's voice was flat, professional. I can take down all 3 of you before you get a shot off. It's what I was trained to do. What I did for 3 decades. He wasn't lying. Not exactly. He'd been military, though not Delta Force. But these men didn't need to know that, Cole, Dutch said nervously. Maybe we should... I said, shut up. Cole's composure was cracking. Here's what's going to happen, Elias continued. You're going to let the boy go. You're going to walk back inside, get the girl, and bring her out. Then you're going to get on your horses and ride away. And you're never going to come near this family again. And if we don't... Cole asked. Elias smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. Then I'll show you exactly what 30 years of asymmetric warfare training looks like. And you won't live to regret it. The standoff held for a long moment. Then Cole laughed, but it sounded forced. You're bluffing. Try me, Elias said. He saw the moment Cole decided to call his bluff. Saw the man's hand move toward his gun. And Elias, who hadn't been in combat in 15 years, who'd sworn he'd never take another life, did what he'd been trained to do. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the clearing like thunder. Dutch dropped to the ground, screaming, clutching his shoulder. Not a kill shot. Elias had aimed to wound. But the message was clear. He wasn't bluffing. Ray came bursting out of the cabin, dragging Emma, his pistol drawn. But he was young, panicked, and his gun hand shook. Let her go. Sarah screamed. Everything happened at once then. Cole drew his weapon. Ray tightened his grip on Emma. And Elias did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He moved. He charged across the clearing, using trees for cover, firing as he ran. His second shot hit the ground near Ray's feet, making the young man jump back. Emma wrenched free and ran toward her mother. Elias's third shot splintered the porch rail near Cole's head. The man dove for cover behind the water trough. Then Elias was at the porch, grabbing Thomas from where Dutch had dropped him, passing the boy to Sarah, who'd run up behind him. Get them inside, Elias shouted. The workshop, there's a root cellar. Hide there! Sarah hesitated for 1 second, meeting his eyes. Then she grabbed both children and ran for the lean-to. Elias turned his attention back to the 3 men. Dutch was crawling toward his horse, still bleeding. Ray had retreated to the far side of the cabin, firing wild shots. And Cole was smart. He'd positioned himself behind the water trough with a clear line of fire to where Sarah had disappeared. You made a mistake, old man, Cole called out. Now we do this the hard way. There's still time to leave, Elias replied. He'd taken cover behind the woodpile, his rifle trained on the trough. Take your wounded friend and go. Can't do that. This is personal now. Ray fired again, the bullet thudding into the wood near Elias's head. Elias returned fire, but Ray had learned to keep moving. This wasn't good. 3 against 1. He had maybe 4 rounds left in the rifle, and his pistol had 6. Not enough if this turned into a prolonged fight. He needed to change the dynamic. Get them off balance. Your friend's bleeding out. Elias called to Cole. He needs a doctor. You stay here, he dies. Dutch is tougher than he looks, Cole responded. But there was uncertainty in his voice. Dutch, however, had made it to his horse. He pulled himself into the saddle with obvious pain and spurred the animal toward the trees. Cole cursed. Ray, stop him! But Ray was too busy trying not to get shot. Dutch disappeared into the forest, and the odds had just gotten better, 2 against 1. Cole seemed to realize he was losing control of the situation. Last chance, Thompson, he shouted toward the workshop. Come out and talk or I burn the cabin down. Elias felt his blood go cold. The cabin, everything he owned. Anna's memory, Mary's things. But more importantly, if Cole set the cabin on fire, the smoke would give away the root cellar's location. Sarah and the children would be trapped. He had to end this. Now. Ray, Elias called out. You know what you're fighting for. $30,000. Split 2 ways now that Dutch ran. That's $15,000 each. But only if you live to collect it. He could see Ray hesitate, could see the young man calculating. Don't listen to him, Cole snapped. Think about it, Ray, Elias continued. Is $15,000 worth dying for? Because that's where this is heading. I was military for 30 years. I know how this ends. Either you leave now, or you don't leave at all. He's lying, Cole said. He's just some old hermit. I put a bullet through Dutch's shoulder from 50 yards, Elias interrupted. In a stiff wind. Moving target. You think that's luck? Or training? Ray was backing toward his horse now. Elias could see it in his body language. He was done. Ray, you coward, Cole started. I didn't sign up to get shot at by some crazy mountain man, Ray shouted. He swung into his saddle. The money ain't worth it, Cole. And then he was gone, galloping after Dutch, 1 against 1. Cole stood up from behind the water trough, his gun trained on the workshop. Guess it's just you and me now, he said. And I'm not leaving without that money. There is no money, Elias said. Sarah doesn't know where it is. Her husband died before telling her. I don't believe that. Believe what you want. But you're leaving one way or another, Cole smiled. It was a cold expression, empty of warmth. You know what I think? I think you care about that woman and her kids. And that makes you weak. He turned his gun toward the workshop door. No! Elias stood up, rifle aimed. They faced each other across the clearing. 2 men, 2 guns, both knowing that whoever pulled the trigger first would live. You won't shoot, Cole said confidently. Because if you do, if you miss or just wound me, I still get a shot off. And I'm aiming at that door. You willing to risk hitting one of them? Elias's finger trembled on the trigger. Cole was right. At this distance, if Elias missed or didn't kill him instantly, Cole would have time to fire. And a bullet through that wooden door could hit Sarah, Emma, or Thomas. I'll make you a deal, Cole said. Mrs. Thompson comes out, talks to me civilized-like, and I leave peaceful. No one else gets hurt, so you can terrorize her again. Threaten her children, so I can get what I came for, Cole corrected. Information. That's all I want. It was a lie. Elias knew it was a lie. Cole would never let Sarah go. Not until he had the money, or was convinced it didn't exist. And maybe not even then, but the standoff couldn't continue. Eventually someone's nerve would break, or someone would make a mistake. Elias made a decision. Sarah, he called out. Stay where you are. Don't come out. Then he lowered his rifle. Cole's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? What I should have done from the start, Elias said. He set the rifle down and straightened up, hands visible. You want information? Talk to me. Leave them out of it. You don't know anything, Cole scoffed. I know plenty, Elias lied. Sarah told me everything, where her husband might have hidden the money, places that were meaningful to him. I can help you find it. He could see Cole considering this, weighing the truth against the lie. Why would you help me? Cole asked suspiciously. Because I want you gone, Elias said honestly. And if giving you information gets you out of here without anyone else getting hurt, I'll do it. Cole studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled again, that cold, calculating smile. All right. Come on over here, slowly, hands where I can see them. Elias walked toward Cole, acutely aware of every step, every movement. He was unarmed now, vulnerable. If this went wrong, but he had one advantage. Cole thought he was just an old mountain man. Desperate, frightened, trying to protect his family. Cole didn't know about the knife strapped to Elias's ankle. The one he'd carried through 3 decades of military service. The one he could draw and throw in less than 2 seconds. He just needed to get close enough. That's far enough, Cole said when Elias was about 10 feet away. Now talk. Where did Thompson hide the money? His mother, Elias said, remembering the letter. She died years ago. He scattered her ashes somewhere meaningful to him. That's where the money is. Cole's eyes lit up. Where? I don't know exactly. Sarah said he never told her. But she mentioned he grew up in Denver. Had a favorite fishing spot near the Platte River. If I had to guess, He was making it up as he went, stringing together fragments from things Sarah had said, creating a plausible story. And Cole was buying it. He could see the greed in the man's eyes, the excitement of finally having a lead. The Platte River, Cole repeated. Where exactly? She mentioned a specific bend in the river. Near an old cottonwood tree. That movement behind Cole, the workshop door opening. Sarah stepping out with the rifle Elias had taught her to use. No, Elias thought desperately. Stay hidden, stay safe. But Sarah had other ideas. Get away from him, she said. Her voice steady, despite the fear Elias could see in her eyes. Cole spun, bringing his gun around, and Elias moved. He dropped to one knee, yanked the knife from his boot, and threw it in one fluid motion. Muscle memory from decades of training taking over. The knife buried itself in Cole's gun hand. The man screamed, dropping his pistol. Elias was on him in an instant, tackling him to the ground. They grappled in the snow, two men fighting with desperate fury. Cole was younger, but Elias had experience and rage on his side. A hard punch to Cole's jaw. An elbow to his ribs. Elias fought with the efficiency of long training, targeting vulnerable points, using Cole's momentum against him. Finally, he had Cole pinned, face down in the snow, arm twisted behind his back. Sarah, Elias panted. There's rope. In the workshop, Sarah ran to get it, and between them they bound Cole's hands and feet. The man cursed and threatened, but he was beaten and he knew it. Elias stood up, breathing hard, and looked at Sarah. She was shaking, the rifle still in her hands. You were supposed to stay hidden, he said. I wasn't going to let him kill you, she replied. I had it under control. You were unarmed and outnumbered. That's not control. Despite everything, despite the violence, the danger, the adrenaline still flooding his system, Elias felt a smile tug at his lips. Fair point, he conceded. Emma and Thomas emerged from the workshop then, running to their mother. Sarah dropped the rifle and gathered them into her arms, holding them tight. Elias turned his attention to Cole, still bound on the ground. Here's what's going to happen, he said quietly. You're going to ride out of here. You're going to tell Dutch and Ray that Sarah Thompson doesn't have the money, doesn't know where it is, and isn't worth pursuing. And you're never going to come near this family again. Understood? Cole glared up at him with hate-filled eyes. And if I don't? Then I'll finish what I started, Elias said flatly. And believe me when I say, I know how to make sure you're never found. He let the threat hang in the air, cold and serious. Cole must have seen something in his face, because the man's defiance wavered. Fine, Cole spat. She can have her miserable life. The money's probably long gone anyway. Elias untied Cole's feet, but left his hands bound. He put the man on his horse, tied the reins to the saddle. Go, he said, and don't come back. Cole rode off without another word, and Elias watched until he disappeared into the trees. Then, finally, he let himself breathe. It was over. Sarah approached him slowly. The children behind her. Is he really gone? She asked. Yes, Elias said. He's gone. Sarah made a small sound, half laugh, half sob, and then she was in his arms. Holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in the world, Elias held her, feeling the tremors running through her body. And let her cry. It's over, he murmured. You're safe now, all of you. Emma and Thomas pressed against them too, and they stood there in the snow, 4 people who'd survived something terrible together, bound now by more than just circumstance, by choice, by love, by the unbreakable understanding that some families aren't born, they're forged. They stood in the clearing for a long time, nobody speaking, just holding on to each other. Eventually, the cold drove them inside. The cabin had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, supplies scattered, personal items strewn across the floor. Emma's face crumpled when she saw the wooden horse lying broken near the fireplace, one leg snapped clean off. I'm sorry, she whispered, picking up the pieces. I tried to hide it, but that big man, he just grabbed it and threw it. Elias knelt beside her and took the broken toy gently from her hands. The leg had cracked at the joint where he'd carved it 20 years ago. The wood was old, the glue long since dried out. It can be fixed, he said quietly. Everything can be fixed. He said it to Emma, but he was looking at Sarah when he spoke. She met his eyes and nodded slowly. They spent the rest of the day cleaning up, restoring order to the chaos. Sarah worked methodically, putting everything back where it belonged. Emma helped, and even Thomas pitched in, carrying things that weren't too heavy. Elias repaired what he could. The broken chair, the damaged door latch, the small things that violence had torn apart. As evening approached, he took the wooden horse to his workshop and studied it under the lamplight. The brake was clean at least. He could glue it, reinforce it with a small wooden peg. It wouldn't be as strong as it once was, but it would hold. He was applying glue when Sarah appeared in the doorway. "May I come in?" she asked. Elias nodded and she entered, closing the door behind her against the cold. "The children are asleep," she said. "Exhausted from everything." Emma didn't want to close her eyes, but she finally gave in. "They were brave today," Elias said, carefully pressing the broken pieces together. "Both of them." "They learned from you," Sarah replied. "Emma's courage, Thomas's trust. They feel safe because you make them feel safe." Elias shook his head. "I almost got them killed. If I'd been faster, smarter." "You saved us," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Don't doubt that. When Cole had his gun on that door, when he was threatening my children, you put yourself between them and danger. You always have." She moved closer, watching him work on the small horse. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "About James, about the money." Elias looked up from his work. "I've been thinking about it," Sarah continued, "about where he might have hidden it. And I remembered something. There was a place, before we were married, when he was courting me. He took me there once, said it was special to him, where he felt closest to his mother." "Where?" "A small cemetery outside Denver. His mother's buried there, even though he told me he scattered her ashes. I didn't understand it at the time, why he'd lie about something like that. But now you think the money's there," Elias finished. Sarah nodded. "It makes sense, doesn't it? He wrote that letter saying the money was where he scattered his mother's ashes. But that was misdirection. The money's at her grave. I'm almost certain of it." Elias set down the wooden horse carefully. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Part of me wants to just forget it, let it stay buried. But $30,000, that could change everything for Emma and Thomas. Good schools, a real home, security. It's also blood money," Elias pointed out gently. "A guard was shot in that robbery. You use that money, you're benefiting from violence." "I know," Sarah's voice was anguished. "But doesn't intent matter? James took it for us to save our farm. He didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. The guard who got shot, his intent doesn't matter much to him now." Sarah flinched. "You're right." "Of course you're right. She sat down on the workbench, suddenly looking exhausted. "I'm so tired of being poor, Elias, of scraping by, of watching my children go without." "Is it wrong to want better for them?" "No," Elias said honestly, "but there are better ways to get it than blood money." "Like what?" "I have no skills, no education. I'm a widow with 2 children, and a wanted poster with my face on it. What prospects do I have?" Elias looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the exhaustion, the fear, the desperate hope. He saw a woman who'd been fighting alone for so long, she'd forgotten there was another way. "You have me," he said quietly. Sarah stared at him. "What, you have me?" Elias repeated. "If you want. If you'll stay." "Elias, I know it's fast. I know there's a lot we don't know about each other. But I also know that these past weeks, they've meant something. You've meant something. And Emma and Thomas," his voice caught. "I'd be proud to call them mine, to give them my name, my protection, my home." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You're asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to stay," Elias said. "Marriage, if you want it. But even if not, stay. Build a life here. Let me help you give those children the security you want for them. We barely know each other. I know enough. I know you're strong. I know you're a good mother. I know you can cook and sew and handle a rifle. I know you're brave and kind, and you make this cabin feel like a home." He paused. And I know that for the first time in 15 years, I want to wake up in the morning. That's enough for me. Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face. What about the money? What about Cole? And we forget about the money, Elias said firmly. We let it stay wherever James hid it. We build a life here, honestly, without blood money weighing on our conscience. I can provide for us. It won't be fancy, but it'll be enough. You'd do that. Take on a woman and 2 children who aren't even yours? Elias reached out and took her hand. They are mine. You all are. If you'll have me. Sarah looked at him through her tears, and Elias saw the moment she made her decision, saw the fear give way to hope, the doubt to certainty. Yes, she whispered. Yes, we'll stay. Then she was in his arms again, and Elias was holding her, and for the first time since Anna died, he felt complete. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, letting the decision settle over them. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah was smiling through her tears. The children will be so happy, she said. Emma's been asking if we could stay. And Thomas, he already calls you Pa when he thinks I'm not listening. Elias felt his throat tighten. Does he? He does. Sarah touched his face gently. You've given us something precious, Elias. Hope, purpose, a family. How can I ever repay that? By being here, Elias said simply. That's all I need. Just be here. Sarah kissed him then, soft and brief, a promise of more to come. When she pulled back, she was smiling. I should check on the children, she said. Make sure they're really asleep. I'll be in soon, Elias replied. Just want to finish this. He gestured to the wooden horse. After Sarah left, Elias worked in the quiet of the workshop, carefully reinforcing the repaired leg with a small dowel. The horse would be stronger now than it had been before, the break mended with care and attention. Like him, Elias thought, broken by loss, but mended now. Stronger for having been broken and repaired. He thought about Anna and Mary, and for the first time, the memory didn't hurt quite so much. They were part of him, part of his history. But they didn't have to define his future. He could honor them and still move forward. Could love again without betraying what he'd had before. When the horse was finished, Elias held it up to the light. It looked good. Whole again. He carried it back to the cabin and placed it gently on the table where Thomas would see it in the morning. A gift for his son, the thought made him smile. Morning came with fresh snow and the smell of coffee already brewing. Elias woke to find Sarah at the stove, and for a moment he thought he was still dreaming. But then she turned and smiled at him, and he knew it was real. Good morning, she said softly, mindful of the children still sleeping in the loft. Morning, Elias replied, sitting up. His body ached from yesterday's fight, bruises blooming across his ribs, his knuckles scraped and sore. But it was a good ache, the ache of having protected something that mattered. Thomas was the first child awake. He came down the ladder, rubbing his eyes, then stopped short when he saw the wooden horse on the table. You fixed it, he exclaimed, picking it up carefully. It's perfect. Good as new, Elias said. Maybe better. Thomas ran to him and threw his arms around his neck. Thank you, Pa. Elias froze. Then slowly he put his arms around the boy and held him close. You're welcome. Son, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah met his eyes over Thomas's head. And what passed between them needed no words. Emma came down a few minutes later, moving more cautiously. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes from a restless night. How are you feeling? Sarah asked her. I'm all right, Emma said, though her voice was small. Is it really over? Are those men really gone? They're gone, Elias confirmed. And they won't be back. I made sure of that. Emma nodded, but she still looked uncertain. Elias understood. Yesterday had been traumatic for all of them, but especially for her. She'd been grabbed, used as leverage, forced to watch violence unfold. That kind of fear didn't disappear overnight. Emma, he said gently, come here. She came to stand beside him, and Elias pulled something from his pocket. Sarah's locket, the one she'd given him before the confrontation, the one with pictures of the children inside. Your mother gave this to me yesterday, he said, to remind me what I was fighting for. I want you to understand something. I would do it all again. Fight those men, risk my life, whatever it took. Because you and Thomas and your mother, you're worth it. You'll always be worth it. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I was so scared. I know. And that's all right. Being scared doesn't mean you weren't brave. You were incredibly brave. I wanted to help, Emma whispered. But I didn't know what to do. You did exactly what you needed to do, Elias told her. You stayed with your brother. You protected him. That took courage. Emma threw her arms around him, and Elias held her while she cried, releasing the fear and tension she'd been holding since yesterday. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her eyes and gave him a tremulous smile. Thank you for saving us, always, Elias promised. That's what family does. They had breakfast together, and slowly the normalcy of the routine helped ease the tension from the day before. Thomas played with his repaired horse, making it gallop across the table. Emma sat close to her mother, but she was smiling again. After breakfast, Sarah pulled Elias aside. There's something we need to discuss, she said quietly. About the future. Elias nodded and they moved to the workshop for privacy. I've been thinking about what you said last night, Sarah began. About staying, about building a life here. And I want that. I truly do. But, Elias prompted. But I need you to understand what you're taking on. I'm still technically wanted for questioning. That poster exists. And even though Cole's gone, there might be others. Other bounty hunters, or even the law itself. I know, Elias said. And the children, they're not yours. They're James's. They carry his name, his blood, his legacy, including the bad parts. They're children, Elias said firmly. They don't carry their father's sins. And as for the name, if you'll have me as your husband, they can carry mine instead. Sarah looked at him with wonder. You'd really adopt them? Give them your name. If they'll have it. If you'll have it. Kane, Sarah said, testing it out. Sarah Kane, Emma Kane, Thomas Kane. She smiled. I like it. I like it very much. Then it's settled, Elias said. He took her hands in his. When spring comes, we'll ride to Blackstone. Find a preacher. Make it official. Why wait for spring? Sarah asked. There's a circuit preacher who comes through the mountain settlements. He's due in the next valley over in about 2 weeks, if the weather holds. Elias felt his heart lift. You want to marry me in 2 weeks? I want to marry you today, Sarah said honestly. But 2 weeks gives us time to prepare, to make it special for the children. 2 weeks, Elias agreed. And Sarah, about your sister, we should still write to her, let her know you're all right, that you found somewhere safe to settle. Sarah nodded. I will. She'll be relieved. She's been worried sick, I'm sure. They stood there in the workshop, hands clasped, planning their future. It felt surreal and wonderful at the same time. I have something for you, Elias said suddenly. He went to the trunk he kept in the corner and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a simple gold band, his mother's wedding ring. His father had given it to him before he died, hoping Elias would pass it on someday. He'd given it to Anna. After she died, he'd put it away, unable to bear looking at it. Now he held it out to Sarah. It was my mother's, he said. Then Anna's. If you'll wear it, I'd be honored. Sarah's hand trembled as she took the ring. Elias, are you sure? This is part of your history, your family. You're my family now, he said simply. You and Emma and Thomas. This ring belongs with you. Sarah slipped it on her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I'll treasure it, always. They kissed then, slow and sweet, sealing their promise to each other. When they returned to the cabin, Emma and Thomas were playing by the fire. Emma looked up as they entered, her eyes sharp. What were you two talking about? She asked suspiciously. Sarah and Elias exchanged a glance. Then Sarah knelt beside her daughter, Emma. Thomas, Mr. Kane and I need to tell you something. Both children looked up with wide eyes. We've decided, if it's all right with you, that we're going to stay here, not just for the winter, but permanently. This will be our home. Thomas let out a whoop of joy. Really? We get to stay forever? Forever, Sarah confirmed. Emma was more reserved, but Elias could see the hope dawning in her eyes. What about Aunt Martha? We'll write to her, let her know we're safe. Maybe she can visit someday. But this, Sarah gestured around the cabin. This is where we belong now. Emma turned to Elias. And you want us here? Really? More than anything, Elias said honestly. I've been alone a long time, too long. You three, you've given me a reason to come back to the world. I'd be honored if you'd stay. There's more, Sarah added. Mr. Kane and I were going to get married. In 2 weeks, if we can get to the preacher. And if you're both all right with it, he'd like to adopt you. Give you his name. Thomas's face lit up. You mean you'd really be our pa? If you'll have me, Elias said. Yes. Thomas launched himself at Elias, wrapping his small arms around his waist. Yes, yes, yes. Emma was slower to react. She stood up and walked over to Elias, studying his face with that serious expression she wore when she was thinking hard. You promise you won't leave? She asked quietly. You promise you'll stay even when things get hard? Elias understood what she was really asking. She'd lost one father already. She needed to know this one wouldn't disappear too. I promise, he said solemnly. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. You're my family. Nothing will change that. Emma searched his eyes for a long moment. Then finally she smiled, a real smile, warm and bright. Okay then, she said. I guess you can be our pa. She hugged him then. And Elias held both children close, while Sarah watched with tears streaming down her face. We're a family, Thomas said, his voice muffled against Elias's chest. A real family. Yes, Elias agreed, his own voice thick with emotion. A real family. That evening, as the four of them sat around the fire, Elias felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The cabin was warm, filled with the sounds of family, Sarah humming as she sewed, Thomas playing with his horse, Emma reading aloud from one of his books. This was what he'd been missing for 15 years. Not just companionship, but purpose, connection, love. He looked at Sarah, at the ring on her finger catching the firelight. She glanced up and smiled at him, and in that smile he saw their future. Years of mornings waking up together, of children growing up in this cabin, of building a life brick by brick. Tell us a story, Pa, Thomas requested. Looking up from his horse, Pa. The words still made Elias's heart skip, but in the best way. What kind of story? He asked. A happy one, Emma said. With a good ending. Elias thought for a moment, then began. Once upon a time, there was a man who lived alone on a mountain. And as he told the story, their story, transformed into something magical for the children, he realized that happy endings weren't something you found in books. They were something you built, day by day, with the people you loved. And his was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the day Cole and his men had ridden away. Spring was beginning to show itself in small ways. Patches of earth emerging from the snow, the creek running free again. Birds returning to nest in the pines. Elias stood on the porch he'd expanded to wrap around the front of the cabin, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Behind him, through the window, he could hear Sarah moving around the kitchen, smell bread baking. The cabin had grown. He'd added a room for the children, expanded the lean-to into a proper workshop, built a chicken coop, and a small barn for the 2 horses and milk cow they'd acquired. The place looked lived in now, loved. There were curtains in the windows that Sarah had sewn, a garden plot marked out for planting, Emma's target practice area cleared at the edge of the forest. Thomas's wooden toys littered the porch, not just the horse anymore, but a whole collection Elias had carved during the long winter evenings. The wedding had happened as planned. The circuit preacher had married them in the small church in the next valley, with a handful of neighbors as witnesses. Emma had worn a dress Sarah had sewn from an old quilt, and Thomas had been so excited he'd barely stood still during the ceremony. Elias wore his father's suit, preserved all these years in the trunk, and Sarah had worn his mother's ring, along with a simple dress she'd made beautiful with her own hands. It had been perfect. Small, intimate, exactly what they'd both wanted. Afterward, they'd filed the adoption papers with the territorial court. Emma and Thomas were legally his now, Emma Kane and Thomas Kane. The children had been so proud, Emma especially, who'd announced to anyone who would listen that she had a new father who was teaching her to be a marksman. Elias smiled at the memory. Emma was getting good too, better than he'd been at her age. She had a natural talent for it, and the patience to practice until she got it right. Thomas, meanwhile, had discovered a love for animals. He helped Elias with the horses every day, gentle and careful with them, despite his young age. The boy had a gift for understanding creatures, could calm a skittish horse with just his presence. They were good children, strong, kind, resilient. Elias was proud to call them his. The cabin door opened, and Sarah came out carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Elias and settled into the rocking chair beside his own, the new one he'd built, placed next to the original. 2 chairs, side by side, for 2 people who'd promised to spend their lives together. Beautiful morning, she observed. It is, Elias agreed. He sipped his coffee and felt contentment wash through him. Hard to believe it's the same place. 3 months ago, everything was snow and silence, and now it's home, Sarah said softly. She reached over and took his hand. Our home, Elias squeezed her hand gently. The ring, his mother's ring, caught the morning light. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the day wake up around them. In the distance, an elk called. Closer, the chickens clucked in their coop, demanding to be fed. Emma asked me something yesterday, Sarah said eventually. About her father, James. She wanted to know if it was all right to still love him, even after everything he did. What did you tell her? That love isn't something you can just turn off. That James was her father, and nothing can change that. He made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but he loved her and Thomas. That love was real, even if other things about him weren't. Elias nodded. That was the right thing to say. She also asked if loving you meant she was betraying him. And I told her that hearts are big enough for more than one person, that she can honor her father's memory and still build a new relationship with you. They're not mutually exclusive. Smart woman, Elias said. Sarah smiled. I have my moments. They lapsed into silence again. Then Sarah said, I heard from Martha. She wrote back finally. Elias looked at her. And? She's happy for us. Relieved, actually. She said she'd been worried sick. Thought maybe we died in the mountains. She wants to visit this summer, meet you, see the children. She's welcome any time, Elias said, and meant it. His solitary days were behind him. The cabin that had once been a fortress against the world was now a home, meant for welcoming people in. There's something else, Sarah said carefully. She mentioned that the law in Denver has dropped the charges against me. Apparently, Cole and his partners were wanted themselves for several crimes. When the authorities investigated, they realized I was telling the truth, that I had nothing to do with James's robbery. Elias felt relief wash through him. So you're free? Completely free? Yes. Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. We can go anywhere now. Do anything. We're not running anymore. Where do you want to go? Elias asked. Sarah looked around at the cabin, at the mountains, at the life they'd built. Nowhere, she said. This is exactly where I want to be. The cabin door burst open then, and Emma and Thomas came tumbling out, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. It's my turn. Thomas insisted. You did it yesterday. Emma countered. Children, Sarah said mildly. Why don't you both do it together? They grumbled but agreed, running off toward the chicken coop, still debating who would scatter the feed and who would collect the eggs. Elias watched them go, feeling a swell of emotion in his chest. His children, not by blood but by choice, and that made them even more precious somehow. I keep waiting for it to feel wrong, he admitted to Sarah, for the guilt to come, like I'm betraying Anna and Mary by being happy again. Sarah set down her coffee and took both his hands in hers. Happiness isn't betrayal, Elias. It's not a finite resource that you use up. You loved them. You'll always love them. But you're allowed to love us too. Love isn't a competition, it's a gift. And the more you give, the more you have. Elias pulled her close and kissed her forehead. When did you get so wise? I've had a good teacher, Sarah replied, leaning into him. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's arms, while the sun climbed higher and the children's laughter echoed from the chicken coop. This was his life now. This was his family. For 15 years, Elias had told himself, and anyone who asked, that he'd always been alone, that he preferred it that way, that solitude was strength. He'd been wrong. Solitude wasn't strength. It was just fear wearing a different mask. Fear of losing again, of hurting again, of caring again. But Sarah and Emma and Thomas had shown him something he'd forgotten, that the risk of loss was worth the reward of love. That being vulnerable wasn't weakness. That family, real family, was worth fighting for, worth living for. Emma came running back from the chicken coop, her face flushed with excitement. "Pa! There's a new chick! It just hatched." "Show me," Elias said, standing up. Emma grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the coop, chattering excitedly about the tiny bird. Thomas ran ahead, eager to show off their discovery. Sarah followed more slowly, and when Elias looked back at her, she was smiling, that warm, genuine smile that had first begun to crack his defenses months ago. In the chicken coop, they all crowded around to see the new chick, a tiny ball of yellow fluff peeping indignantly at being born into the cold spring morning. "What should we name it?" Thomas asked. "Hope," Emma said immediately. Then, embarrassed by her own sentiment, she added, "Because it's yellow." "Like hope is supposed to be bright. Hope is perfect," Sarah agreed, meeting Elias's eyes over the children's heads, and Elias thought, yes, hope was perfect. Not just as a name for a chicken, but as a description of what they'd all found here on this mountain. Hope for the future. Hope for healing. Hope for happiness. Later that evening, after dinner had been eaten and the children were playing quietly by the fire, Elias sat in his rocking chair with the quilt Sarah had finished draped across his lap. She'd completed it weeks ago, a beautiful patchwork of old and new, Anna's stitches and Sarah's blended seamlessly together. It hung on the wall during the day. But at night, Elias liked to hold it, to run his fingers over the fabric and remember. Remember Anna and Mary with love instead of pain. Remember the early days with Sarah and the children. Remember the journey from solitude to family. Sarah settled into her chair beside him, her own sewing in her lap. She was making new clothes for the children, who were growing so fast they constantly needed things let out or replaced. "Tell us the story again." "Pa," Thomas requested, looking up from his toys. "Which story?" Elias asked, though he already knew. "The one about the mountain man and the family," Emma said. She'd heard it a dozen times, but she never seemed to tire of it. So Elias told it again, their story, polished now from repeated telling into something almost mythical, about a man who'd forgotten how to live until 3 strangers appeared in a snowstorm, about a woman brave enough to run toward the unknown with her children in tow, about a girl who learned to shoot and a boy who learned to trust, about how they'd all found each other in the wilderness and created something stronger than any of them could have built alone. When the story ended, Thomas was already drowsy, leaning against his mother. Emma was smiling, her eyes distant as she imagined the scenes. "Is that really how it happened?" Emma asked, as she always did. "More or less," Elias replied, as he always did. "Some parts I've made prettier for the telling. But the important parts, those are true." "Which parts are important?" Thomas mumbled, fighting sleep. "The part where we became a family," Elias said. "That part's completely true." Sarah helped the children up to their room, the room Elias had built for them, with 2 beds and a window that looked out over the mountains. She tucked them in and kissed them goodnight, and Elias did the same, marveling again at how natural it felt. When they came back downstairs, Sarah banked the fire, and Elias locked the door. They climbed to the loft together, their private space, where the quilt Anna had started and Sarah had finished was spread across their bed. Before they went to sleep, Elias stood at the loft window and looked out over the clearing. The cabin, the barn, the garden plot waiting for spring planting. The life they were building together, no regrets. Sarah asked softly from the bed. Elias turned to look at her, his wife, his partner, his love. "None," he said honestly. "Not a single one, even though we've only known each other a few months, even though this all happened so fast." "Especially because of that," Elias replied. He came to sit on the edge of the bed. "I wasted 15 years being afraid, being alone. I'm not wasting another minute." Sarah reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle. "I love you, Elias Kane. I love you too," Elias said. The words came easily now, naturally. "You and Emma and Thomas, my family. They settled into bed together, and Elias pulled Sarah close, feeling her warmth against him. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with its eternal song. Inside, 4 hearts beat in rhythm, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by circumstance, by love. Elias closed his eyes and thought about the man he'd been when Sarah first knocked on his door. That hollow, broken man who'd told her, "I've always been alone." He'd believed it when he said it. Believed he'd always be alone, that it was his choice, his preference, his strength. Now he knew better. He hadn't always been alone. He'd just been waiting for Sarah to appear in a snowstorm, waiting for Emma to prove she had her father's strength, waiting for Thomas to call him Pa, waiting for the courage to open his heart again, to risk the pain of loss for the joy of love. And now that he'd found them, now that he'd found his family, Elias Kane would never be alone again. The mountains stood eternal around them, indifferent to human dramas. But inside a cabin tucked into its fold, warmth glowed against the darkness. Laughter echoed where silence had reigned. Love bloomed where loneliness had withered. And a man who'd thought his story was over discovered it had only just begun.